Talk about using drumsticks. You can use drumsticks. I bought these last night at Walmart because they were out of leg quarters, and leg quarters is the cut that you should be using. And the reason why you don't use drumsticks is, one, the size. It's small enough that the dog can swallow it whole, and it's about the same size as the esophagus, so it could get stuck. So don't use drumsticks. But if you have to use drumsticks, what you do is you take the drumstick and you take a knife and just smash it up real good, so it's sort of flat, like a chicken cutlet with bone in it. Then you give it to the dog. The other problem with drumsticks is the same problem you get using chicken thighs, that there's too much protein to bone. You need the perfect ratio. That's why using chicken leg quarters works great. You have that spine that's sort of in there. You know, there's more bone in there, so it's sort of the perfect amount of bone to protein. If you don't have enough calcium in there, you're just going to have crappy shits. So you want to make sure that there's enough calcium in there for sure, and there's just not in a drumstick or a thigh. So when I did this to feed the dogs, I gave them drumsticks. I smashed them all up. You know, I took like a Bowie knife and smashed them up real good. And then I added some calcium, but calcium without D3. I don't like using bone meal, I'll be honest with you. Bone meal is cooked bone, and cooked bone is not good for dogs. That's why, you know, that's one of the reasons that dogs that are on pet food have a lot of diarrhea and stuff, is that you're giving them cooked bone, and that's an irritant. That's what's in the dog food. Eat a piece of dog food. That's not sand, that's bone meal. So I prefer using calcium, but calcium that does not have D3 in it. So when I'm smashing it up on the butcher block, I put down some calcium, you know, first or afterwards. It doesn't really matter. Just make sure that the calcium doesn't have D3 in it. That way I'm adding calcium, so it really isn't important that drumsticks do not have enough bone in them, because I'm adding calcium. So you don't want to screw up the dog's calcium phosphorus level. You know, if you're giving too much protein to bone, you're going to do that. So make sure and add calcium if you're giving drumsticks or thighs. Thighs are sort of the same way. I don't really see them as real safe. You want a bigger cut is better. And you want to make sure that there's enough bone. If you're giving raw diet without calcium, and this is one of the most common things, this is why vets don't recommend people give raw diet, is because they don't get it. You know, and the number one deficiency of all our pets is calcium. And with dogs on raw diet, it's calcium. So they're like, well, give the dog pet food, and then that way the dog has a balanced diet. But it's a horrible diet because it has a lot of fillers in it. A lot of things that dogs really can't utilize, you know. The wolves coming out of Yellowstone aren't going after farmers' apple orchards, okay? When a dog eats grass, either they're going to throw it up or they're going to shit it out, but it's going to look the same. They can't digest it. So you add a little bit of fiber into your raw diet if you want, sure. But it's a very tiny amount. It's not like the same amount in pet food. So know that if you're going to use drumsticks, which I was in a pinch, so I bought the drumsticks, smash them up, make them sort of flat with a knife, add calcium, and then they're okay. Just sort of avoid chicken thighs and chicken drumsticks. It's not the proper cut. You should stick with chicken leg quarters. And remember, if you're going to use ground meat, like ground beef or ground turkey, ground chicken, you have to add calcium. If you are just giving the dog like hamburger and you're not adding calcium, you're screwing up the dog. You're hurting your dog. Somebody told me recently that there's this idiot who is doing videos on raw diet and how to make a raw diet, and he made a raw diet, right? Adding a ton of fucking fruit and shit like that, but he never put any calcium in it. Like, it was like ground beef and fruit. like that's supposed to be good for your dog or your cat. It's not. It's not. Calcium, remember that? Calcium is the #1 deficiency of all our pet animals. That's lizards, birds, dogs. Don't let that happen to your animal. And if your dog's on a raw diet, bone-in chicken is the proper thing to use, but you want to use chicken leg quarters and these drumsticks. They can be used. If you're in a pinch, you can only find drumsticks, but make sure and, you know, flatten them out with a knife and add calcium. Same thing goes with chicken thighs. A chicken thigh is not a leg quarter, okay? A drumstick is not a leg quarter. If you don't know what a leg quarter is, figure it out before you start feeding your dog raw diet. I don't know how many times I hear people contact me. My dog, I started raw diet and the dog, the dog has diarrhea. Yeah, well, you're probably doing it wrong. You can't tell some people anything. Seriously. Stay away from drumsticks, stay away from thighs.